Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Maria ran through the dark forest. She was rushing, not seeing the road, now and then risking to fall, because the moon, as if being in cahoots with her nightmarish pursuer, hid behind the clouds. The girl choked on her own breath, did not understand where she was running. Just led forward, and as far as possible instinct, the instinct that tells every living creature to save themselves if attacked. But the luck that had accompanied the fugitive so far failed her, and she stumbled and fell. The elbow of her right arm exploded with pain. The thorny branches of some bush whipped across her face. Whimpering, the girl tried to get up and opened her eyes. What was there in the gap between the trees ahead? A road. It's a road. And that means salvation. All she has to do is get out onto it and stop the first passing car. She'll be rescued. She'll be helped. But she did not have time to be heard heavy footsteps, breaking the undergrowth. Maria knew that you cannot turn around. She must go forward, to the people, away from this damned forest. Come on, just a little more. It's only a short walk to the city. But she made the mistake of turning around. He was standing in front of her, a tall demon from the underworld. The rough, loose clothing did not hide the powerful, strong body that clearly belonged to a man. The fingers of one hand, wrapped in a leather glove, moved, spread out in the air, as if a giant spider was moving its legs. The traitor moon peeked out from behind the clouds, and its ghostly glow played on the blade of a machete, which the pursuer clutched in his other hand. Maria wanted to back up, but her foot twisted, hitting a hole and shrieking, she toppled over onto her back. Please, no, please, I beg you. She put her skin-bare arms forward in a futile final gesture of utterly useless defense. The one who towered above her bowed his head as if thinking, but the expression on his face Maria couldn't understand. She couldn't see his face at all because it was hidden by a black and white mask with crudely drawn features, as if a child had tried to make a monster. And then he stepped even closer to her, leaned down and grabbed her by the neck with his free hand, and with all his might slammed her head down, the back of her head against the roots of the tree knotty rising above the ground. Maria didn't cry out anymore, just fell into the darkness. Maria? Maria, can you hear me? The girl groaned and squeezed her eyes shut to open them in the blinding, cold white light. Her face was gently touched by someone's fingers. No, we can't sleep anymore. We must wake up. Come on, be a good girl. The stranger's voice sounded almost affectionate. The girl's mind flashed with images of the terrible things that had happened in the forest. She squeezed her eyes shut tighter, but then she risked opening them. Her gaze came across a wall painted in half beige and pale gray. It wasn't the tree trunks of the night forest, and that made me feel better all at once. Maria felt the soft freshness of the pillow under her cheek and head, which for some reason did not ache at all. And the whole of her seemed to be lying on the bed. The girl took a deep breath and turned her head to the one who was talking to her, looking around. Bare walls all around, the same painted ceiling with tube lamps, a small table and a chair in the corner, a door that was closed now and another door to the side, a bookshelf, but empty. The thoughts in her head were rushing hard through the force as if each of them was wrapped in absorbent cotton. Finally, the girl stared at the man who spoke to her. That's good, the man said and smiled at her. He was very tall, looking about 40 years old, but he looked well-groomed and not old. His blonde hair was neatly parted. His eyes of unknown color looked carefully, as if he was groping with his gaze, wanted to understand through. He wore glasses. Maria noted that he was very well-dressed, dark blue check suit, white shirt, tie, a handkerchief in his jacket pocket. The last two elements of his closet were green with a silk sheen. How are you feeling? Asked the man compassionately and sat down on the second chair and moved to the bed on which Maria was lying. The girl chewed her lips and answered nothing. She was just trying to understand. What had happened? Suddenly her cheek itched and she wanted to scratch it, but she realized that she couldn't move her hand. Why? She had the strength, she just couldn't lift her arm. Maria raised herself up on her elbows at a loss, and from her half-lying position on her back, stared at her wrists in confused amazement. which were secured by wide leather straps that appeared to be fastened to the bed. And it was the same with her legs, both ankles were in anklet straps. What? Where am I? What is this? Let go. The girl panicked, and the man immediately moved closer to her. His palms pressed gently on her shoulders, laying her back down. Hutch, Hutch. You need to calm down. It's okay. You're safe. Don't be afraid. Maria opened her mouth to say that nothing was wrong, that she was tied to the bed for some reason, and that she didn't understand what was going on here, and that she. You don't remember anything? Maria, calm down. The man's palms were still gently resting on her shoulders, and his face was so close that she could feel his breath. Fortunately, she thought, the breath was at least fresh, or it would be unbearable to be tied up and to be breathed on, for example, with unbrushed teeth and onions. The thought made the girl choke on a laugh. I see you're feeling better. The man smiled and finally let go, straightening up. Where am I? Let go. You're safe, and that's all that matters, he replied calmly. And this, he nodded at the straps. I'm afraid it's not possible yet. It's for your own safety. Maria bit her lip nervously. She didn't understand anything, but she realized that she was communicating freely with the man in English, or, to be more precise, she had spoken the last phrase in English, and before that, when she had barely regained consciousness, she had spoken, of course, in her native language. But the man in front of her is an American, of course, because she is now in the USA, and it is natural that he spoke to her in his native language. You are in a mental institution, Maria. He went to the table, took a large notebook with a pen, came back and sat down on a chair, corrected somewhat mannerly the cuffs of his shirt, and smiled at the girl almost lovingly. And I'm your attending physician. What? No, I'm not crazy. You're not. You have no right. Untie me now. The girl was struggling in her restraints. Help, she screamed. Maria had never suffered from any mental disorder in her life, but now? She was in a terrible panic. She didn't understand how she had gotten here, and yet, recent events. That's a shame, the doctor sighed, rising. I'm afraid you're not ready to talk right now. Well, I think you should get some sleep. Now I'm going to inject you with a drug that will help you. Sobbing, the girl leaned back on the pillow. She had already realized that the straps would not come off like this, floundering. And she'd also realized very clearly that she didn't want any drug and she didn't want to sleep. She has to understand what's going on here. No, I'm all ready. Calm down, she said quietly. Please, I don't want to sleep. I just don't understand. Is that so? So, you're ready for a dialogue? The doctor returned to his chair, and for a few minutes they just stared at each other in silence. She was sniffing her nose and suppressing the hysterical urge to test the straps again. He had a suspicious, frightening interest in his eyes. Or maybe it was just the glare on the glasses that made it seem so. Do you remember what happened yesterday? Maria nodded cautiously. So she hadn't been at the clinic long, no more than a day. I was on a date. That's right, the doctor repeated and opened his notebook and began to write something. I'm sorry, what's your name? Didn't I introduce myself already? He arched an eyebrow. Maria could have sworn he hadn't already. My name is Hector Roberts, just Hector to you, of course. So, Maria, you've been on a date. Can you remember with whom and where? The girl nodded again. She felt strange. Her body felt a little out of place. Her mouth felt dry. She remembered everything that had happened yesterday. Maria couldn't explain to herself if it was a defensive quality of the mind or something else, but for some reason she couldn't in her memories go straight to the nightmarish finale. She could only as if she had started the movie moving from the beginning. The morning before yesterday, Maria had been very upset because at work, her boss had basically tied a new girl to her. In general, in the supermarket where Maria worked, it was no secret why it happened the new girl was a fresh girlfriend to the boss, so he put her in place, which in fact, in fairness should have gone to Maria working in this place for a year. But that's how it turned out. Maria was very much looking forward to this promotion. She had bills to pay and debts to pay. In the evening, she decided to go to a restaurant in the Chinatown to unwind and have an inexpensive dinner. There, while she was standing in line for spicy noodles, a guy spilled coffee on her. He began to apologize, handed her paper napkins, and then, as an apology, offered to treat her to dinner. Maria agreed the stranger was so charming. He was a tall, curly-haired brunette with piercing gray eyes. He introduced himself as Geoffrey, and they got to talking. Maria laughed at his compliment about how young she looked and admitted that no, actually she wasn't a student. She was 29 years old. "I'm sorry," Geoffrey smiled. "I just thought you must have come as an exchange student from Eastern Europe. It's all about the accent." "I was born in Mexico," Maria replied. "It's just that my mom brought me here a long time ago, but I just recently decided to come back here. And here indeed, a little bit learned to speak, even forgot some words." "It's not a big deal." He looked carefully into her eyes and goosebumps danced down her back. "You remember the most important things when you need them the most. And your name? You said your name was Mary, but it is." "Yes, but it's just." She shook her hair nervously. She had recently cut her waist-length curls into a bob, and although she couldn't twirl the strands on her finger, she still had the habit of tousling her hair. "It's just something from my childhood too. My mom told me to introduce myself as Mary. She said Americans have a hard time with foreign names. My name is Maria." "Maria, Maria." He said it thoughtfully, as if he was tasting her name. "It's a very beautiful name, and as you can see, I pronounce it perfectly. May I call you that? And Maria, how about a date?" Oh, the girl rounded her eyes. She was not ready for such a rapid development of events. She thought Geoffrey was cute. She was flattered by the fact that he was definitely younger than her. But so soon, a date. On the other hand, Maria hadn't had a relationship since she'd come to America. So why not? "What are we doing now?" she replied flirtatiously. "Now?" The guy was exaggeratedly surprised and gestured to the surrounding space. "We're eating Chinese noodles at a plastic table in some diner. I'm talking about a real date. I want it to be romantic, right? The way it should be. How about tomorrow? Do you like surprises?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Trust me, this one will be unforgettable." Well, the girl stretched out, still pondering. She'd never been on a blind date in her life, and she wasn't in the habit of meeting people on the street like this. But on the other hand, her last relationship had been with a group of friends, and even though they said John was a great guy, it hadn't worked out with him. So maybe trusting the situation now wouldn't be so bad. "Okay, I'm in. When and where do you want to meet?" "Can you come to the intersection of Maple and 13th? He asked. "I'll be waiting for you and it will be unforgettable." Maria nodded. They finished their noodles, agreed on a time and parted, but before they did she gave him her number in case there was a change of plans, and he shared his number with her. Maria went back to her home. It was a very small apartment. It had no air conditioner or washing machine, but the rent was half of her salary because of its location in the center of the city and the proximity to the subway. The next morning, surprisingly, it was easier for Maria to go to work, and she didn't even have to roll her eyes and curse to herself when the new girl dumped some of her responsibilities on her. "You look radiant," Rebecca said to Marie. Rebecca worked here as a cashier, was 40 years old, had 4 children and 3 ex-husbands. "No reason," Maria said. "I met this guy." "Wow. And I told you a new relationship was the best prescription for a broken heart. No one broke my heart, and for all your problems." Rebecca continued with her favorite topic. "Is he cute? He asked me out tonight, and he says it's a surprise. So he's taking me to a restaurant." "What makes you think that? What else do you think a guy calls a surprise date? Unless, of course, he's a total psycho." The co-worker pointed her index finger at Maria. "You need to wear a sexy dress and mind-blowing lingerie." I'm not going to." "The evening could turn interesting." Rebecca winked at her. "Don't miss your chance." Who'd ask me out? "Are you guys going to work?" The boss stood behind the women and glared menacingly. "Yes, we are working, Rebecca muttered, returning to the cash register in front of which, by the way, there were already 2 people. Maria, embarrassed at being distracted by the chatter, also returned to her business right now. She had to put the candy bars on the rack. No evening gown or sexy lingerie Maria was not going to wear on this date. First of all, she thought it was completely unnecessary. Secondly, she simply didn't have such things in her closet. Thirdly, she didn't have the money to buy it all now, even if she wanted to. But tight blue jeans with a wide belt with a silver buckle and a black silk blouse with a raglan sleeve looked very good too. Maria chose black shoes on a low heel, a black handbag, but allowed herself a small touch, used lipstick deep wine color. Here, Now it is ready, now beautiful and ready for a date with a mysterious stranger. It was getting dark outside the window. Jeffrey's designated crossroads was not far away, and Maria assumed that he was really going to take her to some restaurant. In fact, she would have been happier if the guy had picked her up, but he didn't ask her where she lived. He probably didn't ask her so as not to embarrass her, not to seem like a stalker. Maria glanced at her smartphone. It should have been there by now. Suddenly, a car turned into the intersection, slowed down at the curb. Jeffrey waved at her as he got out of the car. "You look amazing." "Thank you," she smiled embarrassedly. He gestured to the car, and she came over and sat down on the seat next to the driver. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "It will be a surprise, as promised." His fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel. The car turned onto Maple Street and sped downhill, toward the exit from the city. She didn't know every nook and cranny, of course, but somehow she didn't feel like she was being taken to a restaurant. Jeffrey gave her a few scrutinizing glances. "Damn it," he cursed, and then laughed and pulled over to the curb. "What, are you afraid I'm a maniac and I'm taking you out of town?" Maria, pressed into the back of the seat, just kept silent. It was embarrassing, but actually, that's what she thought. "I'm sorry," he sighed and smiled guiltily. "I'm such an idiot. But wanted to surprise you." Turning around in the seat, Jeffrey reached back for something. Here, he was holding a basket with a rolled-up play blanket on top. "I wanted to take you to a place near here and have a picnic," he said, opening the basket. There were plates, containers of food, and even a couple of large candles. "That would be very romantic," he said. "A picnic on a forest edge, under the starlight. I'm not much of a cook, so I got it from the restaurant. There's chicken roll with oranges, Greek salad, more brownies, cheese plate." Now Maria laughed at how stupidly scared she was. Jeffrey had turned out to be so sweet, so charming. How could she have fantasized such foolishness to herself? Maria hurriedly apologized and assured the guy that she would be very happy to agree to a picnic. She kept silent about the fact that, in general, guys had never done anything like that for her before, and most took her to a regular restaurant. But a picnic. How romantic it was. And while driving to the place, Maria decided that perhaps Jeffrey deserved a kiss at the end of the date. As they drove out of town, they drove for only a quarter of an hour. The car turned into the woods and literally in another 5 minutes drove to the shore of the lake. Maria got out of the car and on the surface of the water seemed black silk. It reflected the silver golden path of the moon and a scattering of stars. Gusts of wind brought forgotten in the city clean, fragrant with wild herbs and flowers air. In the crowns of trees quietly sang some night birds. "It's a nice place, isn't it?" Taking her gently under his arm and carrying her basket, Jeffrey led her to the lake shore. "You might call it secret," he winked. "It used to be popular for camping, but now," he stopped talking. He spread out a blanket, put the candles in their holders and lit them. He set out the dishes and took the lids off the containers. "Thank you, but I don't drink," Maria said as she watched him uncork a bottle of wine. "Oh, sorry. I should have asked right away. But luckily I've also brought apple juice and mineral water, and there's a thermos with coffee in the car. Can I get you something hot? You're not cold." "No, thanks. I'll have the juice now." Marie was pleased with such care, with which this guy, with whom they barely knew each other, wrapped her like a soft blanket. They sat down on the blanket, slowly began to eat, and talked. Maria continued to be pleasantly surprised Jeffrey talked about himself, but simply, without bragging about anything. He told her that he was studying to be an astrophysicist. "I guess that's because I grew up in Alaska," he grinned. "There's not much to do there, so looking up at the sky all the time isn't a bad thing." "Do you miss your family?" "Very much," he looked at her carefully. "My mom and dad are the most precious things I've ever had. I miss them very much, especially my father." "How did you end up in America?" In general, Maria did not particularly like to talk about this period of her life, but there was nowhere to escape from these memories. She said that her first memory was a swing in the yard of an old 3-story house, where many lilacs bloomed every spring. Maria was born in a small town in the Far East, and her early childhood was spent there. Her mother brought her up alone. Well, technically there was a father, but he was always missing somewhere, and when he came back, my mother shouted that it would be better not to come. Dad was always drinking. And when a little sobered up, he started crying, grabbed little Maria in an armful and hugged her so that it was hard for her to breathe. Father said affectionate words, shoving candy in her pockets, and complained about his severe illness. Then the father was not father got into a fight with drinking buddies. And then Mom became beautiful. Maria through all her life carried this delight when her mother put on beautiful dresses, delicious perfume, and went somewhere for a whole night. Then she brought home groceries, toys for her daughter. Then men began to come to the house, just to visit, and her mother always modestly told her daughter that they were her friends. Only Maria, as she grew older, realized that they were men her mother slept with for money. It's just that over time, she began to have regular lovers instead of one-offs. Some even lived with them for a while. And then one day her mother said they were leaving because she was terribly lucky. Maria remembered how she sat on the windowsill, looked at her hometown yard, where her friends were having fun, and roared. She didn't want to go to America. Her mother said that she was getting married. She had met a foreigner by correspondence. They would live well, in a house behind a white hedge. She would take Maria by car to school. And she, Maria, would have a good education, a lot of smart dresses. Only for the 8-year-old girl that was indifferent, she just wanted to stay at home. She wanted that this summer, as before, at least for a little while, her mother took her to her old grandmother, who lived in the village. But what could she, a little girl, do about her parents' decision? So on the appointed day, she had to get on an airplane and fly far away to a new life across the ocean. That's how Maria remembered her early childhood. But Jeffrey, she could not say all this, and so he heard only half-truths as Mom left her alcoholic father, that she was lucky enough to meet a foreigner and here, moved to the suburbs of Dallas. And then, Maria told Jeffrey that the new marriage had been successful, but empty at the same time. She had never been able to feel like the daughter of this man, unfortunately. In general, Maria was not used to complain, but for some reason, Jeffrey's society acted magnetically on her, forced her to open up. She said that when she was 18, she lost her mother and her adoptive father, and their car went off the rails. "I'm sorry." The boy grabbed her hand and looked into her eyes. "I didn't mean to. I didn't realize I was making you remember such things. What an idiot I am. Asking about your life." He smiled shyly. "I want to get to know you better." "It's okay," Maria replied. The touch of his hand sent a new wave of goosebumps through her body. "I've already forgotten everything. It's been over 10 years. What happened to your brother?" Jeffrey asked, pushing her to continue the story. Maria had mentioned a few minutes ago that her stepfather had a son from his first marriage. His name was Jake, and when Maria came to America, the boy was only 2 years old. "He was taken in by distant relatives," she shrugged. "They wouldn't foster him for me, and then he was definitely better off with him. We never got along." "That's terrible," Jeffrey sighed. "So you had a family, and then you didn't. It's like you never had one. Except for Mom. You must have been very close, huh?" "It's hard to say," Maria grinned. And then Maria told about how it all came to be that she was back in America. After her mother died, she decided to return home to Russia. She returned to the same apartment where she had spent her childhood. She went to university and got a job, and in general, she started an ordinary life. But something didn't add up. After university, it was suddenly difficult to get a good job. Then there was the first serious in life and unsuccessful romance. Finally, Maria decided to take advantage of the fact that she had a second citizenship and return to America. She decided to just try to start over in a new place. "And how did it go?" Jeffrey asked. They had finished the main course and had already moved on to dessert. There were crickets chirping in the grass. "Not much," she shrugged. "I'm working in a supermarket now. I didn't find out while I was at home that my diploma has to be confirmed anyway. There are some complications. I found out that my specialty doesn't pay much here. Maybe I should try a new profession." "Did you hear that?" she suddenly asked. "What?" Jeffrey looked around. "What are you talking about?" "That sound." The girl frowned, as if there was someone else besides us. "I doubt it," Jeffrey grinned. "This place isn't exactly popular in town. Maybe it was a fish splashing in the lake, or some large rodent." Maria tried to return to the romantic mood appropriate for a date, but it didn't work. She had the feeling that someone was watching them. "Did you hear that?" She jumped to her feet. "I didn't hear anything." Jeffrey got up too. "But if you want, we can get out of here. Go to the car, and I'll pack up the place. There's nothing to leave trash." Maria went to the car. She felt very uncomfortable. Perhaps, thought the girl, it was the proximity of the forest where they were sitting on the lake shore that had such a bad effect on her as a city dweller. "Will you be there soon?" she asked, and turned around to hurry Jeffrey. At that moment she froze, for a figure was coming toward Jeffrey, who was picking up the remains of the picnic. A giant figure of a man in a strange mask, white in the darkness. "Jeffrey," the girl shouted, "behind you." "What?" The boy did not understand. He began to straighten up, and at that instant the grim figure raised his arm, lidded steel, and brought it down upon Jeffrey. His scream mingled with Mary's shriek, and the next instant she was running. She raced through the dark woods, unable to see the way, until her pursuer caught up with her. And then she woke up here in the clinic. True, the memory threw up scraps of something else just before, just after the strange awakening. It slipped away. Maria remembered how she was surrounded by people in police uniforms and doctors. They asked her something. She cried, screamed, and begged to save her, said that a scary guy in a mask killed her boyfriend Jeffrey, and then Maria vaguely remembered that then there was another man, and now it seemed to her that it was him, Hector. "I think she'd been injected with something." "Your story seems coherent and even somewhat logical," said the doctor after she told him in generalities, as if they were awkward, broad brushstrokes of paint on the canvas, and in details, as if they were the only ones that mattered, about how she went on a date with a stranger and found herself in a nightmare. "You don't believe me?" Maria asked. "You know, I've scrutinized everything I could find out about you." Hector bowed his head. He sat with his foot on his leg, wiggled his foot in his stylish pointy-toed shoe, and continued to write something in his notebook. "Tell me, Maria, have you ever seen a psychiatrist?" "No," answered the girl, and was completely honest. "I'm not crazy." "What? Why are you keeping me here?" "Because, unfortunately, you have ways of hurting yourself," answered Hector, and his tone was most sympathetic. "You see what's the matter, Maria? A police patrol, driving along the road, heard you screaming. You were screaming so loudly, so terribly. They found you in the woods. You were wounded, and all these injuries you did to yourself." "What? What are you saying?" "On the shore of the lake." "Well, calm down," the doctor raised his hand in warning. "Naturally, the police couldn't ignore what you were saying. They immediately checked that place on the lakeside, and they found nothing there. Your friend Jeffrey, right? He wasn't there. The car? No, it wasn't there either. You see, there was nothing to corroborate what you said." "But," Maria was ready to cry again, "it's impossible. It was just as I said, I swear. You have to believe me. That psycho. You're talking about the guy in the mask, right? A mask with a crude, primitive pattern, like the grin of a beast?" The doctor sighed. "You see, back in the 80s, there was a campground on this spot." "Yes, I remember. Jeffrey mentioned it." "Well," Hector brushed an apparently non-existent speck of dust off his sleeve, and his suit looked like it had just been transferred to his body from a mannequin in an expensive boutique. "The place wasn't particularly popular because the water in the lake was considered dirty. Before it returned to a state close to the wilderness, so to speak, a movie had been filmed there. In the early 90s, there was a low-budget horror movie called Black Heart of Ghost Lake. It was about a maniac possessed by the spirit of an ancient sorcerer." So, the doctor rustled his notebook again and held out, showing Marie a sheet of printout of a movie poster in miniature with a guy in a black and white mask and a Machi looking at her with burning red eyes. "I assume that's who you saw. But fortunately, this is a fictional character. You know, the film passed theaters and went straight to video. And for all this time, there was not a single real maniac who would want to become a copycat of this fictional character. You yesterday, while raving, quite clearly described him, and I happen to be, to some extent, a fan of the movie, and this description seemed familiar to me at once." "No," Maria shook her head. "I don't know what you're talking about. It was real. And Jeffrey was real. They were real. I saw everything. He attacked it. He killed him. He attacked me." "Maria," the doctor clucked his tongue, "you need to calm down. What happened to you is just awful. But who knows," he paused. "Perhaps it's not a manifestation of some serious illness, but of what you—" "What am I?" the girl asked irritably, sensing that he was expecting some sort of answer from her. "Are you taking anything forbidden? Believe me, if the answer is yes, there is no better time to confess it. I'll help you, Maria." "No, I don't take anything. I don't even drink alcohol." "Commendable, the doctor is up. I should have your test soon. And I'm afraid that in that case, if it's not the effects of some substance, I'll have to take over your treatment. But I'm not crazy. Do you know, my dear, that real lunatics are very sure that they're healthy? If you were to admit that you might have imagined it, let's say sleeplessness, fatigue, I'm just confused. You and I will talk about this very soon and in detail. We have already informed the workplace that you didn't come to work for a good reason. What? Maria's eyes widened. You're crazy. Let me go now. You have no right. You came here on your passport as a U.S. citizen, Maria, which means you know perfectly well that you must obey our laws, and they're asking me to take care of your mental health. Well, I think it's time for you to rest. The doctor went to the table and returned to the girl a minute later, leaning over her with a syringe in his hand. You need to sleep? Don't fidget. Stay calm. I don't want to hurt you. That's it, easy. It's okay. You see, it doesn't hurt at all. He sent her what Maria thought was an almost amorous smile. Don't worry, tomorrow you'll be able to talk not only to me, but also to my colleagues, and we'll figure it all out. Maria wanted to say once again, what absurdity around her is happening, but realized that it makes her sleepy. And my advice to you, Maria, turned the doctor, already standing in the doorway. If you want to get out of here quickly, think about what you're going to say to me and the other doctors. So far, everything you say makes me suspect insanity in its most dangerous form. When Maria woke up the next time, she could not realize what time of day it was. After a while, a woman in a nurse's uniform entered the room and placed a tray on the table. She politely asked Maria how she was feeling and said that if the girl was ready, they needed to do a few important things. First, she needed a bandage on her body, was full of the marks that running through the night forest had left. Second, she needed to eat. And to make it possible to do all this, the nurse released her, but did it carefully, as if being free Maria could start to bite. Maria had already realized that it was not the best option to shout that she was not crazy, so the girl only replied that she was not going to do anything stupid and politely added that she would do whatever she needed and whatever else she needed. Please go to the bathroom. Then Maria went back to bed, willingly ducked under the thin blanket and curled up in a ball. She really wanted to be alone. She really needed to think about everything. Do you need anything? The nurse hadn't left yet. Maria glanced at her. She was a short, full-figured woman in her 30s with a lushly disheveled hairdo. Dr. Hector gave the impression of a well-built, educated, but icy man. But this employee of the asylum seemed somehow kind, so cozy and perhaps sincerely sympathizing with patient's woman. Maybe you'd like to read a book. She suggested it. Could I? Maria caught on to a sudden hunch. Can you let one person know I'm here? Oh, the nurse must not have expected that. Why don't I take your request to Dr. Roberts? Is it all right if I don't? Maria sat up on the bed and tried to put on her most pitiful face. He's very strict, you see. What if he decides that I need complete peace and quiet without visits? And then why distract him? You see, this is my friend. She's probably very worried about me. Just let her know where I am. My boss has already been told that I won't come to work because I'm sick. Maria frowned, wondering how they even knew where she worked. Then she remembered that they must have found her purse, and in it she carried a spare name tag because the boss got very angry if any of the employees lost it during a shift. But my friend's boss might not tell her, she continued. Who knows? Oh, said the nurse, her face a look of confusion and indecision. In principle, visits to patients are not forbidden, and you are here. Not quite our patient yet, in the sense that your condition is still in question. It was clear that by saying all this, she was looking for an answer to her question, whether it was possible to bypass Dr. Hector. Yes, of course. Have any of your relatives been notified of what happened to you? I have no relatives in America. I have no family at all, Maria answered. On the nurse's face now read a very strong sympathy, and Maria realized that she had won. Good, the woman nodded. Who needs to be notified? The next day, it took Maria all her willpower not to just laugh in the face of the characters she had to talk to. Dr. Hector hadn't lied to determine how crazy Maria was or wasn't. A whole group of brainiac doctors had gathered. The girl decided that probably, even as she was absolutely sure that it was as she said, but she would have to say something completely different. Now she said that evening after work, she felt very tired and decided to take a shortcut, taking a new road, an unfamiliar route, then panicked that she got lost in the middle of the city, that she was frightened by a stray dog, and then everything was like a fog, and then she woke up in the forest from a nightmare dream, very frightened that it is unclear how she found herself there and ran. Marie was asked questions, she answered, and then she heard the unbelievable. It turned out that she simply had no right to be detained in the clinic for more than a couple of days, and since the commission was convinced that at the moment she is fully aware of who she is and is not going to harm herself, she should be released. Maria almost screamed with happiness. She was ready to kiss each of these doctors because finally she met adequate people. But then Dr. Roberts got up from his chair. With a look of terrible seriousness, without looking at her at all, he spoke about the fact that although formally he is not a permanent employee of this clinic, but his competence and knowledge allow us to say that this case is not so unambiguous. He said that he also felt that he was not in a position to let Maria go without any help, because it was not at all clear that there was no risk that such an episode would not happen again. In view of all of the above, I insist that I be temporarily appointed as Miss Maria's guardian, he said. Maria felt as if she had been hit on the head. What guardian? What nonsense! She was so stunned by this that she did not even resist when she was told to go back to the ward and was escorted there by two big orderlies, as if she could have done something like that on the way. A short time later, Hector came into the room. So, tomorrow morning I'll have all the necessary papers in hand, he smiled. In what sense will you be my guardian? What is this nonsense? Maria asked. I suppose you were startled by the word. That's why you're reacting so inadequately, he replied politely. In fact, it is only a matter of months that you will be obliged to attend my sessions. During these sessions, we will try to find out together what might have caused your breakdown. The sessions are free of charge to you. Guardianship also means you can't leave town, get married, drive any vehicle, buy a gun, use abortion or IVF clinics without my permission. Can I go to the bathroom without you? Maria gritted her teeth. The doctor's face remained impenetrable. I am sympathetic to your unstable condition. It's natural, and I insist that you don't even try to apologize for it. You're not to blame for the fact that your mind is obviously sick. If it would make you feel better, you could, of course, hire a lawyer. But his services are expensive, and you, as I know, you work as a common saleswoman and even have debts. But you, of course, can look for a defense lawyer in charitable organizations. However, I'm afraid they will refuse you because you have not lived in this country for a long time, and besides, you have not only U.S. citizenship, but also other citizenship. So I have listed the main points. With those exceptions, your life will be the same as it was before. You know, Maria, you seem to me quite a sensible person, and if you really want our, let's say, acquaintance to end soon, you will follow all my recommendations. And also, if I so decide, you will take all the prescribed medications. But if, he took a step toward her. Suddenly, he was very close, and his fingers were close to the girl's face, but not touching her. If you do anything foolish, I'm afraid I shall have to reconsider my guardianship and take on more unpleasant obligations for you. It was said in a tone most polite and caring, but Maria felt it a threat, and she also didn't understand why, but it seemed to her that there was something dark about Hector's attitude towards her, unkind. They stared at each other in silence for several minutes. He was devouring her with his gaze. She struggled not to punch him in the face. You're free to go, Maria. Perhaps you'd like to finally leave the clinic? Thank you, doctor, she replied. That's what I want more than anything. After Maria gave her request to that nurse, she waited for the only person she could call her friend here in America to come to her. And when that didn't happen, Maria decided that she must not be Rebecca's friend. That's why she was surprised and even shocked when she left the clinic and saw Rebecca's white pickup truck with a zebra painted on the hood and her collie, who literally jumped up to meet her, waving an umbrella as the rain dripped outside. Oh, my dear. Rebecca flew up onto the porch and hugged Maria. Oh, how awful. I'm sorry I didn't show up sooner. I just found out an hour ago today. Aunt Sabrina said she was going to die and told me to get the whole family together. But it's the second time she's going to die, when she decides, after reading about another deadly disease, that she has all the symptoms. Anyway, it turned out that she had eaten too many stale oranges, and she thought she had some kind of fever, which they get in Brazil if they get stung by mosquitoes. Where do we have Brazilian mosquitoes, really? Oh, honey, how are you? Did you go to a bar and get drunk for the first time like you did the last time? No, I didn't drink. Maria sighed and smiled warmly at Rebecca, but her friend didn't let her down. Anyway, I went away, and when I came back, they told me that the hospital was looking for me. She coughed nervously. But our boss is a creep in places, but he didn't tell anyone about it. So don't worry, there won't be any rumors. Oh, Rebecca slammed her eyes shut, finally and suddenly paying attention to Dr. Roberts, who was standing just a few steps away from Maria. Good afternoon. He smiled politely and extended his hand to her. This is my psychiatrist, Maria said grimly, and a temporary guardian. Rebecca shook his hand, but the smile slipped from her face. What? What do you mean, guardian? No. I know how it is. She waved her hands. I had a cousin who got his grandfather appointed as his guardian. But he wanted to rodeo an alligator right in the local police station. Anyway, he had an excuse, and he was abusing all kinds of. Rebecca coughed again, and Maria thought that with her love of cleavage and miniskirts in all weathers, her next cold was not surprising. And what have you done? Turned to the woman to Maria. Yes, she answered vaguely and looked at Hector. I imagined something. I'll tell you later. Of course, everything later. You need coffee first, Rebecca said. Actually, I wanted to take Maria to her apartment, said Hector. What do you want? Rebecca asked her. Are you with him? Or do you want to come with me to the cafeteria and then go home? You don't want to sit there alone, do you? You've probably had enough of this. And she gave her friend a friendly nudge on the side. Can I? Maria squeaked confusedly and looked at the man, who was more and more disturbing and frightening. Why not? Tell me, what are the powers of a guardian? Rebecca fearlessly turned to the doctor. He answered. She stretched and then smiled. Well, let's go out, friend. You can decide where you live, who you date, and where you work, unless it's a job that's dangerous like mowing lawns on a lawnmower. So she whispered, but only Hector, standing in disgustingly close proximity, could hear everything, of course. If you want to get away from your doctor, just say the word and we'll go eat pizza. How about it? I want to. Maria was the first to move down the stairs and onto her friend's pickup truck. You call me and make an appointment. She threw to the man over her shoulder. I'll be there and I won't run away, I promise. He didn't say anything. He didn't even move and remained standing on the porch, watching the young women with a stare. You want to be honest? Rebecca started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot. I don't like him. He looks like a suburban, $10 million guy, but he gives me the creeps. I'm creeped out. Look, she gave Maria a sympathetic look. You look like you've been through a blender. Where did you tear it all up like that? Maria looked at herself. Her clothes, jeans and blouse, which were returned to her when she was discharged, looked really bad, though they had been washed. I'll tell you everything, but thank you for coming. She didn't want to cry again, but the tears didn't ask if she was ready for them, just poured from her eyes. I'm so scared. I think I'm really losing my mind. Maria bristily lifted her sleeve, exposing her wrist to the mark of the belt she had received when she struggled to free herself. They tied me to the bed there. Those bastards. Rebecca pouted. Hang in there, girl. I'm going to buy you the best pizza in town and you're going to tell me everything. Don't you think I might have lost my mind? Just like that, out of nowhere? Rebecca shrugged. No. Anyone but you. When Maria came on her first shift, Rebecca had been working at the supermarket for 3 years. They talked easily at first, as if it were nothing, but Rebecca was interested in the unusual new girl who, it turned out, had come from far away to America. Then, as it happened, during lunch breaks they began to sit together and talk about life. One weekend they went to a karaoke bar together, and that's how, as if unnoticed, Maria got a friend at the new place. But otherwise she was still the same. Not that she was a recluse, but a rather withdrawn person. She just couldn't help herself. Now, however, as they sat in the pizzeria and Maria told Rebecca about the events of the last few days, she suddenly realized that she couldn't limit herself to that. She had to be honest with Rebecca to the end. You're in so much trouble. Rebecca shook her head as she sipped her soda noisily through the straw, just like in the movies. But how do you think that's even possible? How could the police not find anything? I don't know, but Rebecca, there's more. What do you mean? You see, Maria sighed. You know me. But I haven't told you everything about myself. I have something to confess to you. And if after that you decide that we can't be friends anymore, I'll understand. That would be normal. Because that's probably the kind of decision any normal person would have to make after finding out everything. Okay, the woman shook her head. You're scaring me. But something else seems to me that you exaggerate. Come on, tell me. And in order to tell everything, Marie had to go back to the very beginning of her story. When she and her mother came to America, everything here seemed foreign to her. She didn't want to think of Andrew as her stepfather or little Jake as her brother. However, Maria could not say that she was mistreated. She had her own room. Her stepfather was not stingy with toys and everything that could please an 8-year-old girl. Maria was sent to an expensive private school and hired tutors for her. But she was still like an outcast. She deliberately pushed away from the girls who wanted to be friends with her, and eventually those no longer, and did not try to make any relationship with this strange. Maria took everything she had for granted, and still she was dissatisfied, but gradually this muffled irritation was joined by something else. Maria sincerely began to believe that she was much better than the people around her. She could not then clearly formulate, and in what this superiority was expressed, it just existed, and that's it. Therefore, when she learned that her mother, taking advantage of Andrew's trust, quietly cleaned his accounts, she did not interfere with her parent and even more began to help her. And then, she found out that her mother was cheating on her stepfather. She is having an affair with several other men, and for profit and just for fun. Her mother confessed to Marie that she is taking revenge on Andrew because she doesn't love him, but she has to live with him, sleep with him, in order to provide a good life for herself and her daughter. That's when they had their spat. Mary rebuked her mother that, in fact, she would rather stay at home, and she did not ask to move herself across the ocean. As the years went by, another problem in Maria's life was her grown-up brother Jake. He did not love his sister mutually. He was angry that his father, after his mother died, brought his stepmother into the house. "It's your mother's fault," Maria once told him. "She cheated on Andrew first. He was busy at work all the time, and she was sick. My mom had cancer." Yes, in the past stepfather's family, everything was very difficult. His first wife, Jessica, as it turned out, for a long time had an affair under Andrew's nose with one of his best friends. And then when Andrew, shocked by the fact that it turns out, all these years he raised not his own son, and someone else's child, was going to her divorce, suddenly became known terrible diagnosis of Jessica. Doctors suddenly discovered that she had cancer in a particularly aggressive form and at the last stage. Jessica begged her husband to forgive her and said that the man, Jim's real father, didn't know anything about his paternity because she didn't want this big problem to spoil his building a brilliant career in the scientific community. Growing up, Jake knew only part of the truth, that his mother was cheating on Andrew, but that he was not his own. The boy did not know. And then the truth came out that Maria's mom had stolen money from Andrew's accounts and funds. There was a terrible scandal, which was witnessed by the children. Then stretched long months of settling formalities. It turned out that because of adventures with money, which created Maria's mother, Andrew at the time of his death was, in fact, on the verge of bankruptcy. Naturally, Maria was also left with nothing. The last thing that her American relatives did for her was to pay for her ticket. The girl decided that she did not want to stay in America, with which she was now associated only bad memories. She returned home. Maria, having finished one part of her story, moved on to the next. She told about how she tried to organize her life in her hometown and how nothing came out of it. She also confessed that when she decided to leave, she left her grandmother in a nursing home because she couldn't take her with her, and she probably wouldn't have agreed to go. "I thought I could make a career here and then I'd take her. But I think I was wrong. I was wrong about too many things." She sighed and fell silent. "Well there. Now you know everything about me." Rebecca was silent for a while. "You know, I've really only known you for a short time, and what you told me, well, it's hard to stay in the same mindset when you hear things like that. I thought you were, well, definitely one of the good girls. But I also thought that you," she pointed her index finger at her friend, "and that little brat from the past, they're two completely different people. So, I don't think I should yell at the whole pizzeria that you're a scoundrel and run away, leaving you alone and making you pay the bill for two." Maria laughed. It turns out her friend understood her better than she could understand herself. "And now that we've dealt with the past," Rebecca continued, "it's time we realize what's going on in the present. Let's go to that diner and talk to some people, huh?" "Why?" Maria doesn't understand. "Because maybe someone there has seen your Jeffrey before. By the way, call him." "What?" Maria was confused. "You didn't have that option at the clinic, of course. But try to call him on the phone. And how did I not realize it myself? As soon as I was released, Maria was already rustling in her purse, looking for a smartphone. She hastily dialed the number and heard that there was no such subscriber. That's odd, Rebecca frowned. Maybe he was calling from a burner phone? What do you mean? But why would he do that? Who knows? Actually, there is something in your story that seems very strange to me. Say, did the police talk to you when you were already in the clinic? No, Maria frowned. I don't know. I came to my senses in the clinic and then I was, excuse me for being blunt, Dr. Hector did what he wanted. He said they checked the place and found nothing. They said I did all the injuries to myself. I mean, I talked to the police, but only in the beginning. So here's the plan. Rebecca tapped her fingernails thoughtfully on the tabletop. First, we go to Chinatown, then to the police. We need to talk to the people who found you there in the first place. Anyway, we'll deal with it now. But if you're tired and you need to rest. Oh, no. Thank you. Maria waved her hands. I've already rested so much that I don't think I'll want to lie down for a year. But Chinatown was as lively as usual for this place. We met here. Maria pointed to a van converted into a kitchen on wheels, selling spicy noodles, and even the salesman is the same. Good afternoon, sir, she addressed an elderly Chinese man in an apron. Maria told him that a few days ago, and she gave the exact date and approximate time, she was here with a young guy and she described his appearance in detail. No, I don't remember anything, Mr. Chan replied and went back to the important business of cooking another batch of spicy noodles. Maybe you've seen him here before, or know of any other places Jeffrey's been. I thought he was here a lot. I don't remember anything and I don't know anything. The Chinese grandfather became visibly angry and nervously threw a few words in his own language to the questioners, and it was clearly something impolite. If you are not going to order anything, please leave. You're interfering with my business. Well, this part of our plan seems to be a bust, Rebecca said. There are a lot of people here all the time, and it's obvious that the salespeople have nothing to do but memorize them all. And if Jeffrey wasn't a regular and special customer. In the hope of getting some information, they looked in a few more local stores, but everywhere they were told that they had no idea what they were talking about. On the way back, the two newly minted detectives were getting desperate. They were brought out of their unhappy thoughts by the sounds of Mr. Chan chasing around the truck of a boy of about 13, threatening him, judging by his tone, and the latter bouncing away, stopping every now and then and starting, again judging by his tone, to justify himself. The matter ended with the elderly Chinese man panting, threatening the boy with the spatula with which he had been stirring noodles 5 minutes before, and returning to his van. "Tuck day, boy?" Rebecca asked the boy. Stepping farther away, he stopped at the same candy tent that the girl and woman were standing at. The teenager didn't answer and squinted glumly from beneath his long bangs. "Mine are like that," Rebecca grinned. "They'll do anything, and no matter what, you can't get obedience or repentance out of them. Hang in there, boy," she grinned. "It'll get easier from here. Hey, wait, your name is Ling, right? Who are you?" He squinted. "You're in theater class with my Tom. I'm his mom, Rebecca." "Hello, miss," the boy bloomed in front of his eyes. Maria sighed at how small the world can be. Rebecca asked a friend of one of her sons how they were preparing for a production of one of Shakespeare's plays adapted for children, inquired about the health of Ling's mother, who was also raising him alone, and finally, once again sympathized with him about the scene at the noodle truck. "Grandpa is good," said the boy, picking a chipped piece of asphalt with his sneaker toe. "He's not mean. It's just that they want to take away our business, so he's angry." "Take it away? For what?" Rebecca asked. "Competitors. Mr. Bao," he nodded towards a restaurant with a beautiful red and gold sign. "He owns almost all the stalls here. Those who don't belong pay tribute to him. Grandpa doesn't." "Then you should complain to the police," Rebecca said. "Mr. Bao pays them," the teenager grinned. "They run the place themselves. This precinct runs the place." The boy looked up again, now worried, as if he'd said something he didn't mean. "All right, miss. I've got to go. I've got homework to do. Say hello to Tom." "I think we've reached a dead end," Rebecca said after they made another fruitless attempt to ask the Chinatown residents if they'd seen Jeffrey here before. He couldn't just vanish into thin air. Maria tried to hold on, but now, after everything she'd been through, it suddenly began to seem to her at some point that maybe there was a possibility that she was. Had she really made it up? Made it up? Fooled herself? It happens to men. Rebecca winked at her. But some of them have to have a baby with you first. And your Jeffrey seemed like a gentleman. Look, I gotta get home. You're lucky Alan's in your position. He doesn't want to be seen as a madman who's ready to torture his staff to death. So you can stay off work for another week. He'll hold the place for you. Why don't we meet Saturday and go to the police station? I think you have a right to talk to the officer who found you and get a first-hand account of what happened. Thank you. I just don't know what I would do without you. Maria hugged her friend from the bottom of her heart. Back home, Maria was only going to take a quick shower and immediately go to bed. But already under the covers, she reached for her smartphone. First of all, she listened to the voice message that Dr. Roberts had left her, in which he gave her the address of his office and scheduled the first session for Monday. And secondly, after that message, she wanted to know more about who would be treating her. There wasn't a lot of information, but there was something very interesting. Maria grinned. It turned out that in his youth, this psychiatrist had almost been disbarred for having an affair with one of his patients. She also learned that he had been educated in Europe, in Great Britain and France, and had taught at the FBI Academy for several years. He had written several serious papers on, among other things, split personality syndrome and the specifics of false memories. Maria shuddered. It looked like she was in serious hands. I wouldn't want this Hector to invent to diagnose her with something serious, like schizophrenia, or then it would be impossible to wash off and remove such a diagnosis. Lately, Maria, not counting her stay in the clinic, was not accustomed to idleness. She either worked a shift and a half or just slept to have the strength to go on shift again. Now she was left to herself. The next morning, having cleaned up the apartment so that everything shone, the girl climbed into the armchair with her feet and, taking a deep breath, decided to dial her grandmother's number. She tried to convince herself that it would be better, for the old woman Selena was already 89 years old and several serious illnesses had made her practically helpless. She could no longer manage the household in the village and to take with her. Maria expected, and in this with Rebecca she was honest, that having managed to arrange her fate in America, she would move her grandmother there and be able to provide her with a decent old age. She tried to choose a nursing home, which seemed to have a good reputation. It was paid for by most of Grandma's pension, as well as the rent from Maria's apartment, which was now occupied by strangers. Grandmother did not want to move to a nursing home, but when she learned that her granddaughter was going to America, then she gave her consent. True, she accompanied it with many bitter words that here lived to the point that no one needs her at all, and that if her own granddaughter leaves her, then perhaps it would be better to be under the care of strangers. Maria called her, but not too often, because the grandmother, after the first few calm phrases, then invariably began to reproach her and ask her when her granddaughter would come back, when she would already play her nonsense. Nobody in this America needs you, Grandma Zina repeated tirelessly. What do you think you're doing? If you can't work or get married here, what makes you think you'll be welcomed with pies and honey on foreign shores? I thought you were not like your mother, and you're still on the same crooked path. Maria always hurried to politely wrap up the conversation, but when she called this time, now for some reason her grandmother did not start to say the usual phrases to her, as if she felt that something was wrong with her granddaughter. But Maria, of course, could not tell the old lady about what had happened to her, and so she got away with the lie that she was just very tired at work and a little sick with a cold. When are you going home? Zina finally asked her. I don't know, Grandma. As soon as I can, Maria answered her. When the conversation was over, she went to the window and just looked at the street, where in the gray shroud of rain stretched strings of lights, which merged into the headlights of rushing cars on the road. Maria had never seriously so before thought about the fact that her American dream. It was time to admit it finally failed. Everything was not as easy and beautiful as she had once dreamed, and now she couldn't even just fly home. After all, Dr. Hector said without his permission, in fact, she could not do anything. Maria gave herself a mental smack. She did not even have the savings to try to hire a smart lawyer. That's what they call getting into trouble. And now it's urgent to decide what to do next. Because she wasn't ready to admit that she was crazy, so she had to deal with everything that was happening to her. Dressing warmer for this day promised unprecedented for this southern state cold, Maria went to the police station. In general, she understood that it would be necessary to call Dr. Roberts and clarify, in which police officers found her then. But the last thing she wanted to do was to talk to that intimidating doctor. She feared that he would take her zeal in his own way. But Maria assumed that since she and Jeffrey had been out of town, she had probably been found by a patrol from the precinct to which her neighborhood and the outskirts of town belonged. Maria hoped it wouldn't be too difficult to walk in, ask the officer on duty how to find the right cop, and then talk to him, naturally demonstrating complete adequacy. But barely Maria stepped over the threshold of the station, she realized something wrong. Wrong was the fact that there was an unhealthy revival in it. Most of the police officers were trying to calm down a group of bikers who were loudly indignant about something. "Miss, if you don't have an urgent matter, please leave the room." A swarthy and very young policewoman jumped up to her. Maria had no time to answer, but from the other end of the station, sweeping away everything in his path, in her direction rushed a type of huge biker, so formidable and red-haired that he seemed a real Viking, unknown how thrown into the modern world straight from the ancient battle. "If you so much as lay a finger on my bike, I'll sue you all," he bellowed. "Sir, calm down. Your bike is evidence." A short, overweight officer in his 50s hurried after him. "Sir, I'm asking you." The biker turned around and just shoved the officer, or tried to, but the officer reacted instantly. A scuffle ensued. Maria lunged to the side, and just in time a stool thrown by someone crashed into the wall above her head. "Miss, down." The young woman in the uniform pulled her down. Maria didn't even have time to be frightened. The fuss was over quickly, and the Viking biker was subdued by the other cops. And the one who tried to talk to him stood and pressed his palm to his injured nose. "Actually, it's an emergency. You see, a few days ago something strange happened to me. Something strange, and I was saved by a patrol officer. I'd like to talk to him." "Where and when was it?" the girl asked quickly and professionally. "Oh, miss, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Officer Kowalski." Maria quickly named the day it all happened to her. Alex and Dale were on duty then, but Dale isn't on duty right now. Only Alex is available. He nodded at the very officer with the injured nose. "But I'm afraid you'll have to wait a bit." She headed towards the policeman, apparently to escort him to the place where the first aid kit was kept here, as Maria had assumed. And then she noticed a wallet under her feet. It looked like it had fallen out of the officer's pocket in the heat of the fight. Yes, she remembered it. It was Alex's. "Sir." Maria galloped after him and Kowalski. "You dropped it," she said, holding out her wallet to him. The moment she held it out, a small photograph fell out of it and fell at Maria's feet. She bent down, glanced at it, and handed it to the officer with a smile. "Oh, thank you, miss," he smiled, still covering his nose, from which red was seeping onto his fingers. "I need to talk to you," Maria added embarrassedly, "but it's not an emergency for me. You need to now." She smiled. "I hope you don't have anything broken." "I've had worse," Alex grinned. "Yes, thank you." "Oh, you're the girl from the forest. How are you?" "Oh, sorry." He sighed with difficulty, and his fingers got even more dirty. "Wait a bit," and he disappeared into the depths of the station with Kowalski. By this time the bikers had left the station in a noisy bunch, except for the one who started the fight. Maria realized that she could sit down and wait as an ordinary visitor. But all this noise and fuss had made her very tired, and she realized that it was vital for her to have a cup of coffee right now. So the girl left the station, deciding that she would just a little refresh her strength and come back. Maria stood in line for a latte at the nearest cafe. She thought about what she should do next and how everything that was happening could fit into the framework of any logic. And then, suddenly, as if struck by lightning, Maria very clearly remembered the photo that the officer had dropped. It showed him, there was no doubt about it, only he was much younger. On it he was not in uniform, but in a plaid shirt. He stood on the river bank. In one hand he held a fishing rod. The other rested on the shoulders of a boy a little older than 10 years old. Their faces seemed very, very familiar to Maria. And then she remembered a scene from her past. Police officers come to their house to report the death of her parents. One of them is a relative of her brother Jake, and he hugs the boy and says he will take care of him. Maria felt like the room ran out of air. She felt dizzy. She recognized him. Alex was that relative. So, that officer who had saved her was the same man who had been given custody of her brother years ago. "Miss, your coffee." They called her from the counter, but Maria was on her way out. "Miss, you forgot your coffee." The barista guy gave the strange customer a pensive look and shrugged his shoulders. Well, if a person suddenly changed his mind to take his order and just left, then this person is strange, but he has no time to chase after a customer with a cup of drink. He is already full of work. Miss? Suddenly she was called outside. Turning around, Maria saw Alex. The officer was walking toward her across the street from the car his partner was sitting in. I guess I should thank you again. He slapped his thigh, where his wallet lay in his uniform pants pocket. This picture is very important to me. You're welcome. Marie found it hard to say. She felt impossibly awkward. How small the world was that it had turned out this way, that her accidental savior was a man from her past, someone who had taken care of her brother, which she had preferred to just fly away from them all. I didn't see you at the station when I came out of the doctor's office. He pointed to his nose, which now had a band-aid across it. I was just about to go on duty. My partner got sick, and they gave me some green rookie to replace him. Oh, I'm sorry to burden you with my worries. I happened to see you coming out of the coffee shop. It seemed you wanted to talk to me about the events of that evening. It's so awful. You must have coughed awkwardly. I can't imagine what you've been through. But I hope you're feeling better now. Yes, Dr. Roberts is my guardian, Maria replied, for the time being. He says I've had a nervous breakdown and will soon be all right, she added hastily. And right now, I'm quite independent and free. That's wonderful, the policeman smiled. Maria hesitated. What did you want to talk about? Alex asked. My partner will call me. He pointed to the radio on his shoulder. We can sit down, he nodded at the bench, and talk right now. But if you want a more formal setting, then please come to our station. Not tonight. We're on duty late in the city. Well, actually I wanted to talk, finally decided Maria, and went to the bench and sat down on it. The rain had stopped an hour ago, and the metal surface of the bench had time not only to dry, but also to warm up under the rays of the sun. I wanted to tell you that I'm very grateful that you saved me back then. I was just doing my duty, miss. Alex looked at her very carefully. You see, when I picked up that photograph, I recognized you. You must have forgotten me. That's right. That's fine. But we used to. We knew each other a little. I'm the daughter. Anyway, I'm Andrew's stepdaughter, Maria, and I recognize you, he said. Back when we first brought you to the hospital and the doctors opened your papers, they said your first and last name, and then I looked at your face again and realized why you seemed so familiar. 10 years have passed, he grinned, and you're still the same girl. You know, Maria, I realized that you... Oh, what am I saying? Don't worry, please. I understand everything. You lost your mother and you. There was no reason to stay with people who, unfortunately, never managed to become a real family for you. Maria sat with her head bowed. She had not expected to hear such warm words, to me understanding and even sympathy. She simply could not hold back her tears. They talked some more. Alex told her briefly that her brother Jake had grown up to be a great guy and had already studied. He worked as a manager in a large company. She talked a little about her life. However, Maria changed her mind about asking the officer about any details of how he found her that night. It just wasn't worth it right now. Alex was also kind enough to leave her his phone number and told her that if she remembered anything about that night, he was obviously implying something real, she could call him. After this meeting, Maria went back to her house, had a quick dinner, heated up some half-finished food in the freezer, and just went to bed. I'm sorry, but there's no way I can come in today, Maria boldly told Dr. Roberts on Monday, just 5 minutes before her mandatory appointment. He decided that he probably wouldn't make her come back to the clinic if she missed her session one single time. She just wasn't ready for that yet. In fact, she found the whole thing of trying to look inside her head, even though she was perfectly healthy, just disgusting. So she refused, listened to Hector's complaints that it was no good, and hung up. That same day, Maria called work and told her boss that if it was okay with him, she'd like to get back to her duties because the bills, they wouldn't pay themselves. Rebecca was at work too, but sent politely that they needed to slow down their investigation. She had some family issues of her own that needed to be addressed immediately. Maria said it was fine. I'd give you a ride, Rebecca said at the end of the day when Maria was on her way home. But I have to go to the warehouse to receive goods, so I'll stay here until morning. That's okay, Maria replied. I'll take the subway. But actually on the subway, she was not going to go. The weather was wonderful, and the girl decided that she would rather walk. In general, before this nightmare happened to her, Maria used to go back home by the route that ran through the park. True, at present, most of it was closed for reconstruction, but the charm of this place did not diminish. True, this evening in the park was unusually deserted. Maria began to think that the city was extinct, so quiet here. Not even almost the noise of cars. "Maria," a familiar voice called out to her, and she stopped. And when she turned around, she cried out and rounded her eyes, because Jeffrey was standing in front of her. "You're alive." "But, Jeffrey," the girl's heart was racing. "But, how? What happened?" I was locked up in the asylum," she shouted hysterically and sobbed. Thoughts were rushing feverishly through her head. Jeffrey looked exactly the same as he had that night. "You? Did he kidnap you, that psycho? And you ran away?" That thought seemed to make the most sense now. "Maria," Jeffrey sighed, "I'll explain everything to you. Please, it's okay. What's going on?" The girl was trembling. She just really didn't understand how Jeffrey had survived that attack and how did you find me?" she asked suddenly. He smiled warmly, welcomingly, and opened his arms to her. "Don't you want to hug me first? It seems we didn't finish our date then." Maria wanted to say that she had been locked up in a mental institution because of the whole story and that they should go to the police together, so that Jeffrey would confirm everything and she would be believed. But she didn't have time to say any of this, because out of the darkness, from the corner of a building that had long ago been closed for repairs and part of it overlooking the park, suddenly appeared a tall figure in a black and white mask. There was a disgusting sound of metal scraping against stone. The monster was wielding a match sheet against the wall. Maria couldn't stand it any longer and screamed for her. It was happening all over again. Jeffrey, behind her. This time the boy turned around before the monster got close. He backed up and he rushed towards Maria, grabbed her arm and pulled her behind him. "Run!" In those moments, it seemed to Marie that she was closer than ever to really just going crazy. They ran together, flying forward. The second exit from the park was far away. They turned under some archway and then burst through some door and found themselves in an unfinished part of a building once long ago. Jeffrey pushed Maria against the wall and they fell silent together. "Can you hear him?" the boy asked in a whisper. She didn't have the strength to answer, but shook her head negatively. "Call the police." That's exactly what Maria did. She pulled out her smartphone, except that she had a different number on speed dial now. She had given Alex her phone when he said he would give her his number, and now the connection was with him. But Marie didn't care because he was a cop too. Stammering, breaking down into tears every word, she said that she was in the park and that she had been attacked. "I'm not alone. Jeffrey's with me. He's real. I'm not crazy." She finished the conversation and Alex said in a worried voice that he would be right there. I don't understand anything. I'm scared. I'm going crazy," wailed the girl, wrapping her arms around her head. She looked up at the guy with a stricken look. "What's going on? How did you survive? Who is he?" And then a nightmarish figure appeared in the empty doorway. Maria screamed. And the next moment she was startled to realize that the silence of the night, in which the nightmare was embodied, was broken by one sound not at all suitable for it, a quiet laugh. It was Jeffrey laughing. Stepping aside, he spread his arms and grinned broadly. "My dear Mary, how tears and fear suit you. I see you appreciated my little performance." "What?" The girl stopped crying abruptly. She was just shocked by such a sudden change, and it had a refreshing effect on her. What are you talking about?" "You know, I thought for a while that you really should," he nodded at the masked figure, "be the victim of an urban legend that was made into a horror movie. But then I thought that would be too easy. It's not as simple as having you turn out to be crazy and spend the rest of your life in an institution." "What? How? No. What are you talking about?" The girl slumped against the wall. Her eyes darted frantically between Jeffrey, who was, in fact, the stranger she had so recklessly agreed to go out with, and the masked maniac. "You know, I wanted to be an actor at one time," Jeffrey grinned. "I even went to Hollywood, but they said I didn't have the talent." "Well, at least it was enough for an amateur production." Why are you doing this?" And here's where it gets interesting. He stepped closer to her. His hand reached forward and grabbed her neck and squeezed. "I understand 10 years is a decent amount of time, but I kept thinking that at any moment you'd look at me and say, I recognize you. You did. He stopped talking, as if giving her a chance to finish. She clung to his hand and stared into his face with eyes widened with horror. And then she remembered the photograph she had returned to Alex. Her brother's face had faded from her memory over the years, but now she realized how different the 12-year-old boy in the photo could be. She could see him in front of her. "You're my brother, Jake?" she finished. "Good girl," the boy grinned. "Are you still wondering why I'm doing this? What did your mother do to my father? That girl took him away from him and robbed him of everything. You ruined our family. Your mother slept with half the town because she didn't have enough money and tried to suck it out of my father's business partners, his country club friends. It's a good thing that bitch flew off into the abyss. And you wanted to do it too, didn't you? You know, I thought you were gone, like a nightmare. And then I found out you were back. What are you doing here? America is not your country. You're a stranger here. And then I realized that fate itself was giving me a chance to make things right. And this," he nodded at the masked man, "you know, I'm a genius. Thanks to my little performance, you'll be declared insane and end up in a clinic. My father will take care of that." Your father is dead," replied Maria with the last of her strength. "Andrew was a good man," Jake replied thoughtfully, "but he was my stepfather. My real father. Unfortunately, he wasn't allowed to raise me, but he became my mentor and supported me in what I needed to avenge." With those words of his, the tall masked man approached. A match heat gleamed in the moonlight on his shoulder, and then he raised his hand and revealed his face. "Dr. Roberts." Maria gasped. The psychiatrist answered her with his trademark polite smile. But, I don't understand." Her heart was beating so fast that she could feel its beats in her head. She was barely able to keep her feet, and that was mostly due to the fact that Jake was still clinging to her neck. "Why did you do that?" she whispered, and met Jake's gaze with coldness. A siren wailed, and she yelped and gasped as Alex's police officer appeared in the building. "You?" It was only now that a coherent and nightmarish picture of what had happened began to form in Maria's mind. The policeman who had found her was Alex, the man who had raised Jake. That's why nothing was found at the scene. Of course, there were some things that didn't add up. Was there only one policeman to look through the woods in the lake shore? Maria asked and coughed. Jake finally let her go and stepped aside with a squeamish expression on his face. "I'm glad you didn't think of me as a good cop coming to the rescue to save a girl from harm. And you're smart too," Alex grinned. "You're right. I was on that duty with my partner. He might have suspected something. But you see, Rick depends on me. He was, let's say, not clean, and I helped him to settle this little misunderstanding, and so he'll be a fish out of water. He confirmed that we found you in the woods. He said everything right. Believe me, he's the last person who cares about this whole thing. He's got enough problems of his own. When I got to Chinatown, they told me they didn't remember you." Maria turned to Jake. "Alex took care of that too. Ren the guy they all, let's say, depend on the favor of this police station. He told the merchants not to dare to say anything to one girl and showed your picture. Fortunately, they were sensible enough. They didn't even realize why they were asked to do it. All they need is a command, like trained animals." Jake spat angrily on the ground. "And they'll keep their mouths shut. What kind of person are you?" Maria shook her head. "Do you really hate me that much? And you think you can get away with this?" "Why not?" Jake grinned. "Just think about it. Some girl says she and her boyfriend, who no one's ever seen her with, were attacked by a character from an urban legend. A movie once made. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? And then her insanity is confirmed by a respected doctor. It's done. The girl is declared insane and locked up in an insane asylum. And from there, believe me, you wouldn't get out very soon. If you ever got out at all. It can't be that easy for you," whispered Maria, desperately shaking her head. "No, I'm not crazy, and you can't prove it." "Jake, I think we should go," Hector grinned. "It's getting late, and I have to visit my patient tomorrow, who has had another bout of insanity after being left unattended and unmedicated." Maria looked from one to the other of the trio in confusion and horror. She just couldn't believe it, that this was happening to her. And at the same time, it was real. The girl suddenly realized just how helpless and vulnerable she was. Who really would be believed? Her, who had only recently come to America, or a respected psychiatrist and police officers? "So, miss," grinned Alex, and his smile was like a grin, "I think we should go for a ride for now." Suddenly, the silence of the night was broken by the wail of sirens. FBI! Nobody move! In a matter of moments, people with recognizable inscriptions on their clothes were around them, armed FBI agents. Maria hardly realized, what now? What's even happening? As if in slow motion, the scenes of Jake, Alex and Hector being detained floated before her. The way they were asking her if she was okay, the way she was being led out of the park and into the ambulance, where a warm blanket was thrown over her shoulders, and she was being examined by a doctor. And yet Maria understood what they were trying to talk to her about. That night she never slept a wink. There was too much going on. One of the FBI agents explained to her that it turned out that Alex's partner had been under their wing for a long time. He was tired of being dependent on Alex's favor and wanted to bargain his freedom for a lot of serious testimonies with evidence about what was going on in the station and how much corruption there was in it. He also shared with the FBI his suspicions that Alex must be up to something bad, after overhearing several conversations he had with Jake that mentioned plans for revenge against Marie. Marie was also offered to talk to a psychologist, and actually, she realized that now she was being offered the help of what must be a normal specialist, but she resolutely refused it. Please, the girl quietly addressed the FBI agent, I just want to go home. Miss, he didn't understand. I want to leave America. When am I going to be released? You're free to go, he replied. As I said, Dr. Roberts is no longer your guardian. That was illegal in the first place. However, you will have to stay for a while to testify in this investigation. Marie had to agree to this condition. But then, as soon as she was told that she was finally completely free, she went to work to quit. What had happened could not go unnoticed by the press, and many things became known at work. Alan instantly signed her resignation letter and said that she would receive her paycheck in a matter of hours. Rebecca clutched her in a friendly embrace. How is that even possible? I don't know. The important thing is that it's over. So you're really leaving for good? I guess so, smiled the girl. I made a mistake when I first flew here. Well, at least you got to know me here. Rebecca winked at her. You do that. Call and write at least sometimes. Maria promised she would. She resolutely refused to talk to journalists and quickly began to pack her things. Then there was the airport, and a long flight. The apartment, which seemed to have been left an eternity ago, was met with dust and a feeling of desolation. Not having rested from the road, Maria started to clean it. She had neither time nor desire to be lazy. There wasn't much money left, but she decided that in a day or two, when she had settled in again, she would start going to interviews and would definitely get a job somewhere, maybe in a profession, or at least a saleswoman. That would be wonderful too. The next day after her arrival, Maria went to the same address. Her heart was heavy, and at the same time she felt happier than ever. The girl held her breath when she stepped over the threshold. At this afternoon time, the residents of the nursing home were left to themselves. Some were napping, others were reading, watching TV, or walking in the yard. Grandma Zelina sat on her bed and just stared at the wall opposite. Grandma, Maria said. I'm back, Grandma. The old woman raised her head. With difficulty she got up. Her legs weakened with excitement immediately, and she almost fell down when her granddaughter stepped towards her and enclosed her in an embrace. Maria, my darling. But how are you? Are you for good? Confused old woman asked, not believing her joy. Yes, Grandma, for good. Through tears Maria answered, and I'm taking you away from here, Grandma. Right now, we will live together. Do you agree? How could I not agree? She answered. She had always wanted to do just that. Granddaughter, how good it is now. How peaceful it is at heart. Soon the girl went out into the street, leading the old woman by the hand. I called a cab, Maria said. Good, my legs are not walking well, answered Selena, but only. Wait a minute, let me stand, breathe and warm myself in the sun. The weather that day was really wonderful. The girl and the old woman stood together, exposing their faces to the sunlight. They stood in silence. They just felt good that they were together now. Now both of them could be home.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.